Okay. Okay, a little bit of an intro. Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy and founder of the Empathy Tent. So this is our empathy circle, and we have the intention to bridge social and political divides and build a culture of empathy. And that means for everyone to be heard and understood to their satisfaction, and to foster dialogue and to see our common humanity. And these empathy circles, we want to scale these up and have hundreds and thousands of people take part, as well as become facilitators. So if you're a viewer of this circle, we invite you to take part in a future circle, and you can also become a facilitator, and you can go to empathycircle.com, and there's information on how to get involved in this. So this circle itself is specifically in support of the National Day of Empathy, and that is for March 5th, 2019. I'll just read here how they describe it. Americans impacted by the criminal justice system will meet all over the country with federal, state, local lawmakers to share their experiences. This includes family members who have lost loved ones to violent crime, formerly incarcerated people, children of incarcerated people, individuals who have overcome drug addiction or any kind of addiction, and many others will join across demographics and party lines. The goal is to generate empathy on a massive scale for millions of Americans impacted by the criminal justice system. And the website for that is dayofempathy.org. And there's probably 60, 70 or more organizations around the country involved in this. And the members are going to the state capitals to talk to legislators about this issue. So we can start with I just introduced myself. If you two would like to introduce yourself, David and Jessica. Jessica, perhaps like to just start, just your name, maybe political leanings.
My name's Jessica. I live in Alameda, California. My political leanings are definitely in the conservative area with some libertarian leanings. Classical liberal, I suppose, a mixed bag.
Okay, thanks. David?
Yes, my name's David, and I live in San Francisco, and I consider, if I had to put a name on myself, it's just straight up conservative. What that means, I'm still figuring it out. But yeah, it's complicated. I don't know how to sum it up in a nice that way.
Great, thanks. So I think you both know how to do the empathy circle process. Is that right? I mean, I know David's done many, and Jessica, you've taken.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, okay. So I'll just for any viewers, just give a quick explanation. So in this process, we'll have a topic, which is what is relationship and role of empathy, laws, policing, and punishment? And that ties in with the Day of Empathy. And so one person will speak. They'll select who they speak to. They share whatever is on their mind about the topic or whatever is alive for you. And the listener will reflect back their understanding to the satisfaction of the speaker. And then once the speaker is heard, we'll have 5-minute turns. Then once the time is up, then the listener becomes a speaker and selects who they're going to speak to. And we just go around for the time allotted. And we gave it an hour and a half today. So we've still got about 80 minutes or so. So with that, I can be the timekeeper. Who would like to start on the topic? What is the relationship and role of empathy, laws, policing, and punishment?
David.
Okay, do you want to start? Just speak to me to model it, and if you like.
Who are you talking to?
Oh, well, I guess I'll speak. I'll speak to you, David. So
okay.
I got the timer. So yeah, I just found out about this Day of Empathy just like 3 or 4 weeks ago, so I haven't had a lot of time to organize stuff, and so just sort of last minute, I've been trying to organize some activities around this event. So I would like to support it, and especially since it's a Day of Empathy, you know, it's our topic, so I really want to get it involved.
Okay, you said that you wanted to do something in the spirit of the upcoming Day of Empathy. That you feel a need to do something because you're obviously involved in empathetic programs, so to speak. So you wanted to get involved.
Exactly. And so that's what these circles, you know, I'm trying to organize some circles in the next couple of weeks around it and really reach out to people and organizations that are working on this. So that's kind of my intention, I guess, just wanting to share my intention around what we're doing here.
Okay, you said you would like to arrange some circles in the next few weeks organized around this theme of Day of Empathy.
Yeah. And for me, the kind of the deeper issue is I just see the overall justice system in the United States is not really empathy based. And I think, you know, for me, I think we should sort of redesign the justice system to be more empathy based.
Okay, you said that or what I hear is that you feel like there's problems in our justice system, and that perhaps one of those problems is there's not enough empathy-based elements.
Mm-hmm. So it's really, and it fits into a larger, you know, culture of empathy. The people who commit crimes is generally they're not empathizing with the people who they're committing crimes against. You steal from someone, you're not empathizing with the, you know, the well-being of the person you're stealing from. If you're, you know, I had my car stolen in front of my house here, that whoever stole it was not thinking of me when they, you know, when they stole it. So there's sort of a lack of empathy there. And then there's also sort of a lack of the justice system is based more on punitive judgment instead of trying to heal and train people in empathy. So
you said you'd also like to recognize that on the quote unquote criminal element of it, criminals don't have empathy towards people that they commit crimes towards. And you brought up an example of someone stealing your car, and you don't think the person that stole your car obviously didn't have too much empathy for you as well. But you would like to see it promoted in the criminal system and perhaps the culture in whole. Because
the value of empathy.
The value of empathy is because it seems like the criminal justice system is more focused on punitive measures and not trying to heal the wounds that are culturally wide, perhaps.
Right. So there's the lack of empathy that happens with the crime. Then the judgment is, it could be more of an empathy circle, restorative empathy process. And then if people are incarcerated, I would like to see like them come out as empathy training experts, that they got plenty of time, that they should be doing empathy training there and come out as empathy facilitators. That would be kind of my ideal, sort of, yeah.
Okay. So you said that, you know, there's a lack of empathy in the people who committing crimes. There's a lack of empathy of the judgment system, the punitive measures, and then you would also like to see people that are incarcerated perhaps take part in some empathy facilitating
training,
training, so to speak. So when they come out, they can be better empathizing citizens, so to speak.
Yeah, so kind of really that would be part of building that culture of empathy. So yeah, I feel heard. Thanks. It was 5 minutes too.
Okay, I'll keep it rotating. I'll talk to Jessica. You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting circle. There's two conservatives and one. There's, and then there's Edwin. um, I don't know where to begin. Yeah, empathy and crime. I've seen both sides. You know, I used to live more of a underground, underworld type existence. I was a drug addict, like a homeless drug addict. But I've never really been a career criminal, so to speak. So I've had dealings with cops, and cops have had dealings with me.
So I'm supposed to answer now, right?
Not answer, but kind of repeat back what I just said.
You said that you've had dealings with both sides of the criminal justice system with the because you have been on the streets being homeless due to drug addiction, and so you've seen it in action, but even though you weren't a criminal yourself.
Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of hard. I don't think it's really workable to do it in a professional manner as far as this implying empathetic processes. I think it's something that's a problem with our culture as a whole, and I think like something that should be a lot of it goes back to respect. There's a lot of like respect is required for empathy, I believe, and that's more something that ideally is taught at home. And once it reaches the street level, it's a totally different story.
I'm hearing you say basically that empathy begins at home, and it's based on respect, and it's taught in the home, and it's a very complicated thing to be able to deal with it once it's gotten out of the home.
Yeah, I think police are basically military light. They're not social workers, even though in San Francisco they act more like social workers. And I think there's a lot of criminals that don't respect the police here, and that's the reason why there's lots of break-ins and stuff because cops here are not as hardcore as they are perhaps in other places.
You're feeling that the police are just military light and they're not social workers and they're not empowered or even trained how to deal with these criminal cases that come up in San Francisco. So it's just kind of running amok right now because they aren't really doing their jobs.
Well, yeah, I said in San Francisco they are trying to act like social workers
Right,
sometimes.
exactly.
And I feel like they're not doing their job, their function of stopping crime. Okay. Yeah, because on the streets it's pretty much might is right. You know, people I don't and empathy has its cost. You know, I don't want to empathize with someone, you have to enter their mind space. And I don't want to enter the mind space of someone who's going through a lot of negative stuff if I don't have to, because it's extremely draining and there's lots of psychopaths out there.
Yeah. What you were thinking or saying was that it's a very costly endeavor to have empathy for people who have a lot of dysfunctional issues going on inside their head, and it's draining.
Yes. And like the stuff I went through during my time, during like my heavy drug use and homelessness and stuff, that was I was going through some dark stuff, and I was playing it out, working through it my own way. It wasn't very functional, but that's just the way it happened. And there's a lot of it was a very lonely existence because people did not want any part of me because I mean I had so much like weird energy coming. I was dealing with such dark stuff that people only bad people would want a piece of that. And a lot of people just left me alone. I felt like in that case, that's probably the best empathetic thing they could have done is kind of let me do my thing as long as I wasn't hurting anyone, you know, because maybe they related in a time in their life where they were going through some darker stuff.
So you're basically saying that when you were homeless and going through your dark period, um, it was better that you were left alone because it would have been very difficult for people to even interact with you at that point.
Yes. And I didn't realize that at the time. And speaking of time, my time is up.
I guess I'll talk to Edwin right now.
Okay.
I think one of the most difficult things with this empathy in the criminal justice system is that you're dealing with some people who have lost their way. I don't know when, maybe when they were in the home, probably in a dysfunctional home, or through maybe addiction or alcoholism. And I think the main frontline police officer has a really difficult job, like when you do a traffic stop or any kind of stop. They don't know who's in that car, what kind of person it is. Are they going to pull a weapon on them? So they're kind of on a hair trigger all the time. I know when I'm stopped by a police officer, I'm really nervous because I know that the police officer doesn't know me. He doesn't know who I am. I might be, a radical underground police hater for all he knows, or just a crazy person. So I always try to keep my hands visible and follow whatever instructions a police officer gives me. And that's my empathy with the police, with law enforcement.
Okay,
So
what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of dysfunctional people out there in the world, and that you have empathy for the police, that when they're stopping someone or interacting with people, they don't know really what to expect. So you realize that, and so if you're stopped by the police, you're sensitive to like keeping your hands on the wheel and kind of doing what they say to do, and so that's sort of your way of empathizing with them, making it easy for them.
Yes. And then when people get into the court system because of whatever crimes they've committed, I mean, it's kind of overwhelmed. And now it's my understanding they don't even bother going to trial anymore most of the time. They just do plea bargain down. So I feel like that's kind of an insult to our rule of law that people don't really get trials anymore. It's just easy and it gets rid of people really fast. So I feel like that's a breakdown of empathy between the rule of law and the individual.
So there's in our court system that people don't really go to trial, they just plea bargain, and that's sort of a lack of empathy there, doing that plea bargaining. And that's like a breakdown of the rule of law too, because you're not following the law and not having a trial, you're just plea bargaining.
Yes. And then when people get their sentences, I guess if you're a murderer, what can you do? You have to send them to jail. And once you get in there, it's a pretty harsh environment. So it would require a lot of training and a lot of probably funds to reorganize the whole prison system to build up something that would get into the brains of these people. And then you have the sociopaths. I mean, psychologists have studied sociopathy, and their brains are atrophied in the part where you would feel any empathy for somebody else. So then you have that element also.
So you're looking at the prison system, and how would you sort of redesign that to be more empathic? And you're just seeing the difficulties of it. There's sociopaths, psychopaths, and it'd just be a challenge to redesign.
Yeah, and I think that nonviolent people, the people that just commit property crimes, they could be dealt with probably more in empathy by having them do restitution or community service instead of just throwing them, incarcerating them right off the bat.
Mm-hmm. So there's the violent criminals, and then there's the people who've done non-violent crimes, and they could be sort of there's things that they could do, like restitution and so forth, would be ways maybe dealing with those people.
It seems the way the civil authorities in San Francisco are dealing with it, just letting them out, not following up on them or trying to deal with with, say, if they broke somebody's car window, they don't make them try to pay.
Yeah. So if somebody breaks somebody's window, they go into jail, and then they just get let out, and there's no restitution. It's just like, plea bargaining or whatever. So you're kind of going through the system and just seeing the problems and how empathy relates to that system. And so instead of just letting people go, they could be doing restitution, for example.
Yeah, community service, maybe wash his car, go work at a car dealership and clean the cars or something.
So it could be restitution and community service as a way. And I think you said wash cars, or that's the restitution.
Yeah. All right, that's all I have.
Okay, that was 5 minutes too. So then I'll speak back to you. Just to shake it up a little bit, the direction. It's the justice system is like a system within a larger cultural system. And it's like, for me, it's like, how do we change that whole system to be more empathic? And so it's like we need not only the justice system to be changed, because all factors of the system all relate to each other. So it's really, at one hand, is like, how do we think of the large system, culture, which I just see as a culture, and then the parts within that culture to change it.
So you were saying that you see it as a many-layered problem with the community, and then once you get into the justice system, that it needs to be changed on many levels.
Yeah. And then there's the home. I think it was David or whoever it was that mentioned the home, right? That there's, teaching respect and empathy in the home. So that's kind of like a starting point too. But, people are stressed at home. They don't have the tools. They don't have the process. We're not taught in the schools, for empathy skills. Like just this simple empathic listening, I think if it was taught in the schools, would have helped me a lot, at least, growing up through grade school. If we'd had empathy circles in my family, which we do now, actually, it's been very helpful. So it's like, there's all these different parts of the system, and each of those parts, can be redesigned to be more empathic. So.
Yeah, you were saying that in the home and in the schools, educational system, empathy is not usually taught because of either the parents are stressed out, they're too busy, and the schools aren't structured to have any sort of empathy training. So
yeah.
People are losing out from the home and in the school.
And my little nephews and nieces are like 5 and 7 years old. They're kind of beating up on each other, and I started teaching them how to do empathy circles. Even my 5-year-old niece kind of got the hang of it. And she said, after we did an empathy circle, they were in a fight. I listened to one of them, and then I listened to the other, empathically listen, and I had them, empathically listen to each other. And my 5-year-old niece, she says, I like empathy circles. Let's do it again. So it was just this, being able to talk things through in a constructive way. It can start pretty damn young,
So you were talking about your own environment and with your nieces and nephews that you try to do the empathy circles and they appreciate your input on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it at a basic level.
Yeah, and they're able to do it. So, and I just wonder, what keeps us from doing that within the culture? And sometimes I think the culture is sort of addicted to conflict. It's like it's addicted to name calling. It's like calling the Democrats names or calling the conservative names. It gets so polarized, and people are so caught up in the battle of it and the kind of the excitement of it and the cortisol rush of it. So I'm just kind of looking at how do we kind of have transform society, to have more kind of constructive dialogue and empathy. And just one of the blocks seems to be this addiction of conflict we have.
So you were saying you feel there's a cultural addiction to conflict, and it would be good if we could sort of redirect that somehow.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That
Yeah.
empathy.
Yeah. So, and I guess the one thing is, again, I would say, since we're talking about criminal justice reform or incarceration, is it's like people have time. Since we should be in jail, that they could just be doing empathy training, have ongoing training. So when people come out, they're just like total experts at being facilitators.
And you said in the criminal justice system, people when they're in the incarcerated, they have a lot of time on their hands. So that would be perfect environment to have time to have the empathy training if it could be implemented.
Yeah, I feel heard. Thanks.
Thank you.
So it's your turn to choose. Probably David, since he hasn't spoken this round.
All right, David.
Okay.
So you go or I go?
You go. It's your turn to speak.
Oh, okay. Well, I know when I was growing up, as far as empathy goes, our parents let us go out and play, and we didn't see them the whole day long. So we always got in fights, and we were friends the next day. So I guess we sort of developed our own empathy due to not enjoying fighting all the time. It's like, I don't know.
Okay, you said that when you were young, your parents were away a lot, and so you and your peers would get in fights, but you would somehow end up friends the next day. So you feel like you sort of self-regulated empathy just to like not be enemies all the time, right?
Yes, it was more like if you live out in the countryside, you're allowed to go out and play and go wherever you want once you get to be a certain age. And so you're not in the house under your parents' nose. Probably maybe you come in for lunch and then come in for the evening for dinner during non-school years. So that was pretty much the way it went. We didn't have adults breathing down our neck all the time, helicoptering over us every second.
So you said in the countryside, you were kind of allowed to go out when you were a certain age, and you didn't necessarily have parental units around helicoptering, monitoring your behavior.
Yes. So I think this empathy thing, it can be a good thing to teach nowadays, because we live in an environment where children aren't allowed to go out and release their energies in a productive way and without supervision. So I suppose it's more necessary for parents to be more hands-on as far as behavior. But also when I was growing up, we also had the religious factor that you should treat other people as you'd like to be treated. So if you did step outside those boundaries, like I remember when I was in elementary school, there were some really poor people. So one child brought in his lunch with some biscuits in a tin bucket, and I made fun of him, and I was like sent home that day because I did that. So that was the way empathy was taught, by punishing you if you dishonored people.
Okay, you said you started out by saying you think kids nowadays get out less and work out their social skills, like people probably in previous times did. So maybe now it is prudent to have more parents proactively teaching empathy skills, and that you remember growing up, there was a religious element of like the golden rule, so to speak, of like treat others like the way you would like to be treated, and you feel like that was in play. Give an example by you. One time you made fun of someone who carried their biscuits in a tin bucket or something, and you were sent home for disrespecting that person.
Yes. So I guess the thing is in postmodern, I think a lot of postmodernism, lets people have free reign. Like I know there's a big problem in the school system right now with the children just running rampant and not being disciplined, and teachers being afraid. Like I was reading something from Nashville that the school district there is like imploding because of all the threats of violence against the teachers, and the teachers not able to control the classroom. And if they do try to control the classroom, they don't get any backup from the administration at all. So I think there's a real breakdown here between discipline and being afraid to offend people. Like I think it's all kind of based on the situation that if you discipline someone who's in the so-called minority group, you're being racist, whatever, and disparate impact on them, when it's really just individuals misbehaving that need to start respecting each other.
Okay, you were saying that you feel like nowadays, in particular, that in the school system, that kids are kind of running awry, so to speak, and teachers have lost control of the classrooms and disciplining the kids when they do wrong. And if they do decide to do that, they don't get any kind of administrative backup. Um, and and also an example, if the person happens to be a minority, there's other problems too, because there's a racial tension, like being labeled a racist if you try to discipline a child that's perhaps in a minority group. So it's just leading to a sort of culture of no accountability, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yes. Well, that's all I have to say right now.
Yeah. I guess I'll talk to Edwin.
Okay.
Yeah. I kind of want to riff off what Jessica was saying. I think a lot of this stuff does start to become dysfunctional especially in the public school system. I went through the public school system, and I did not have a very good time at all. I got picked on a lot, and the teachers were very indifferent, and I kind of got a sense of this world being very unjust at a very early age, and I became very distrustful of my peers and of my elders at that point.
Okay, so you're talking about the schools, building on what Jessica mentioned about the schools. And in the school, when you went to school, you got picked on, and the teachers didn't really pay attention. You just became very well aware of the lack of fairness or justice in the school system.
Yeah. Like when I started like kindergarten through fourth grade, I went to a county school out in the middle of nowhere. And we had scuffles and stuff like that, but for the most part, it seems like we handled ourselves a little bit better. It was less personal. There was also one element. It was kind of a racially homogenous school out in the county. It was mainly white folks, so there wasn't really a lot of this racial tension that went on. But then when I moved in with my dad, who lived in the city, started going to the city public schools, where it was very racially mixed, so to speak, and there was a lot of racial tension, and it was just like a whole other vibe of non-empathetic. It was just the viciousness was increased big time because you had different tribes of people against each other, and it started in school years.
Mm-hmm. So when you initially were going to school, it was out in the country, which was in a more homogenous community, and there was fights and stuff, but it wasn't so vicious. Mm-hmm. And then when you went to the city, where there was the different, more racially diverse, there was more of a vicious racial aspect to the conflict that was happening there.
Yeah, and a lot of it was racially charged. Another one was just like it's more of a big city impersonal vibe,
Hmm.
you know, and so it's a little bit more ruthless that way. I mean, I remember one example of something that happened to me. I believe it was 7th or 8th grade during PE. Um, Back when they had PE, I'm not sure if they even have that anymore. But I was playing basketball with a friend. It was a black friend of mine, and I was horsing around with him, just kidding around. I forget what it was. I was just teasing him or something, but we were friends, and it wasn't that big a deal. And then this other black kid comes up to me thinking I'm picking on him, and he decides to try to like start a fight with me. And this kid was like half my size, and I told him like he started pushing me. I told him like, don't push me. This is, we're friends. It's like it's none of your business. But he had his mind made up, and I ended up busting his nose for him. And I remember the coach at that time was another black guy, and he actually laughed at the other guy. He goes, "See what happens? You messed with the wrong person." Like whatever. I got suspended, but then like his brother was in a local gang there, and I ended up getting jumped by like 15 people, and the teachers didn't do anything about it because they didn't want to touch it because
Mm.
of racial. And like I was a bunch of white kids watching it happen too because they didn't want to have anything to do with it, and yeah, that kind of hurts empathy a bit whenever you feel like you're dealing with not just individuals but groups of individuals.
Hmm. So you're saying that this racial kind of being in groups and not just being relating individually can hurts empathy. So you had I guess, a black friend who was you were friends with, you're horsing around, and then someone else saw that, another black person saw that, and he thought you were picking on him, and he stepped into it to, I guess, to confront you, and you said, "Hey, we're friends." You tried to explain it, but he kept sort of pushing you, and then you ended up getting in a fight with him, punching him, and the coach, who was also black, he actually just kind of sloughed it off. However, you got suspended, and then later on you were jumped by like 15 people, and nobody did anything about it. So that's maybe also again your sense of the fairness of an issue of the fairness of or justice. Wasn't any much justice there, as well as again the racial aspect added to the overall stress of,
Yes.
of tension of what was going on there.
Yeah, there's I think especially when racial stuff is thrown in, there's automatic lack of empathy because you're dealing with the other, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes from like, maybe a white cop with a black citizen or the black citizen with the white cop. They both look and view each other as they're in two different worlds. And that really gets in the way of empathy and things really,
Uh-huh.
you know.
So having those different tribes, seeing yourself sort of racially as a different tribe, that kind of blocks empathy. Maybe instead of just seeing each other as individuals or as fellow human beings, which would be more supportive of empathy, of an empathic connection.
Yeah, I like to make one last point, just kind
Mm-hmm.
of held, you know, coming off from that point. That's just a microcosm of our culture as a whole. We're a multicultural nation. We got different peoples with different alliances dealing with each other, and so in schools it's principals and maybe police are involved, but in real life you have police and then lawyers, and then even higher up like political figures get involved in this stuff. And this might sound like I'm not making a case for white supremacy or white nationalism or whatever, but I'm saying for empathy to work, it's easier if the population is homogenous, and our population is not homogenous. So that's just an extra hurdle
Mm-hmm.
to do that, because I think one reason why, like, say a nation like China is able to have like more like cohesions because they're homogenous people. There's less tribes, and for empathy, that's one reason why our system is the way it is. Maybe it's more cold in nature the way it is because we are a multicultural nation, and we have to kind of stick to the rule books, and be objective as possible. because of emotions involved. There's a lot of people that just hate each other by default here.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that a culture like ours, which is multicultural, that creates these different tribes in a sense. And those tribes, seeing yourself as a tribe, creates a block to empathy. And so maybe cultures that are more homogenous don't have that tribal aspect to it. And so empathy would be easier to, it'd be easier to empathize with others.
Yes, I think those are some of the some elements that are in play.
Yeah. So these are just elements that, as we look at kind of the nature of empathy in the society, these are some elements we need to work with and are in play.
Yeah, that's all I have to say for now.
Okay, cool. Then I'll speak back to you. So let's see, the first one was the bucket story. Let's see, sent home, not empathic. Oh, so there was the story of the school. I think Jessica was mentioning the school and being sent home for having said something and being punished for that. So I don't see that as an empathic solution to the conflict. I can't remember exactly what the conflict was now about the bucket, but what?
She made fun of her because of the bucket.
Oh, she made fun of, yeah. So she's making fun of somebody, and she's sent home in punishment for being being sensitive. So I would say an empathic solution to that would have been if the teachers had said, "Oh, there was this conflict. We're going to bring you into a dialogue with the other people, and maybe even people affected, other students affected by it, and they would have had an empathy circle to talk about the issue. So they would have been able to talk it through, and they would have learned sort of dialogue and empathic listening skills. So to me, that would have been sort of an empathic solution. The punishment is not, I don't see that as an empathic solution.
Okay, you brought up Jessica's bucket story as an example of like you didn't view that as a empathic, her being sent home and punished for that as being an empathic solution. That an empathic solution would have involved Jessica, the bucket person,
Yeah,
and perhaps other people involved in that to talk it out and and maybe learn something from it.
yeah. They would have understood where the other person was coming from. Plus, they would have learned the skills of dialogue. So it's sort of a failure of the school system, to be really fostering an empathic process. And then, kids, once they learn this, they can use it on their own when they're interacting. I mean, I've heard of schools where the kids just kind of have those skills and they're able to just kind of talk through these issues.
I just kind of drew a blank. You said that you feel like that the empathic solution would have been better,
Mm-hmm.
and that you would. I'm not sure if you said.
Yeah, schools could be teaching it, and the kids could have learned the process and the mindset, and then be doing it on their own too to work through issues.
Yeah, and you said the kids doing this, the kids could learn, some new skills of how to do that instead of just being punished.
Yeah, and some of the stuff going on in the university. I don't know if you guys have seen the Evergreen University in Washington. What happened there? Where it was like a progressive professor. He got in some conflict with the students, and they just basically had him thrown. I mean, it was like a total. If you see the video of it, it was almost. And this is like a very progressive university. It was almost like the I don't know. It was like they took over the school, and it was just like crazy stuff going on there. Where the prince of the director, they were like bossing him around. I mean, it just turned into, it's too big of a story to get into, but it was like the university was just like it was just like crazy in terms of the lack of empathy, the students taking over. It was just that chaos that, one of you had mentioned before.
Yeah, I think I know. Was that I'm going to repeat back what you said,
Sure.
but is that the one where they had the day without black
Right.
people. Was
Uh-huh.
it that one?
It was that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw about that. Yeah. Well, you were mentioning a case of when a professor, in this case, I know he was protesting the day without white people because he thought it was inherently racist, and then like the students basically took over the school, put harassed him, and actually was pushing the director of the school around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did see that as well.
Okay. Great. And so that's, that's not empathic either, as well as, your situation with with the fight. So if your school, the approach that I would have taken is that the coach said, well, let's have an empathy circle. Let's talk this through, and then it could have headed off all this, you getting suspended or whatever. So again, for me, that is, a culture can be built across these racial divides, I feel. And it's sort of this, if people know that empathy is our core value, and you institute it and people get trained in it, I really think that these schools can be turned around. And it takes a lot of work, but I do have hope that it is possible.
Yeah, you were saying that what happened at that school with the professor and stuff, that was an empathetic approach. And like what happened to me, that wasn't empathetic as well. That they could have had a sit down with me and the coach and the person, that I got in a fight with. And you feel like a culture of empathy can be promoted even across racial lines if kids, especially if kids are taught at a younger age how to deal with that kind of thing.
Yeah. I feel fully heard. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I I thought about commenting more about the racial elements of it, but
Who are you speaking to?
oh, I'm sorry. I'm speaking to Jessica. I'm jumping back into Jessica. I would like to comment more on the racial stuff, but we're three white people here, so that might not be prudent, so to speak. But like, there's problems in our culture dealing with that, and part of that is, from what I see, is like white people are not allowed to like kind of represent themselves and defend their side without being like labeled a white supremacist. So that's not helping empathy at all. If we're going to have tribes of people, we have to have representatives of each tribe to be able to maturely handle those kind of situations. But that's all I have to say about that.
I hear you saying that you would like to talk more about the racial aspect of the problems with empathy, but since we're all just one race here, that might be a bit difficult to get a back and forth and another perspective on the situation. And also, you feel like every group or tribe has the right to defend themselves and the right to advocate for their group. And white people are kind of at a disadvantage because they're told that they're racist if they try to in any way defend themselves.
Yeah, represent themselves.
Present themselves, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just leave it there. That could be a circle with more colorful participants, to get involved in that discussion, I think. Going back to police and empathy, yeah, that's a tough nut to crack because, I think a lot of this I think it's good that we're talking about school and home because, especially with two parent now in our culture, I think another problem is in our culture, a lot of families either don't have a father, or it's just one parent, and when they do have two parents, both parents are working. So, it's almost up to the school systems to raise kids now, and they're not. That should not be the function of school. They should be taught social skills, perhaps, yeah, but a lot of it's deep rooted stuff needs to start much, much earlier.
So you were reflecting on the fact that because there's usually only minimal parent involvement because they're either working or there's just one parent there and not two parents. And if there are two parents, they're both working. So a lot of the burdens falling on the schools to to uh, to teach the children social skills, I suppose, how to deal with others.
Yeah, and I don't think the schools are a good place to try to raise kids.
Right, and it shouldn't be, the school shouldn't be the parent. Is what you're.
Yes. I could get conspiratorial and think that's what the government want is state-raised children, but that's another subject. But what was I going to say? Oh yeah, I mean, by the time the police are generally hands off, unless it's extreme like cases of kids under 18. You know, you can get your record erased before then. There's juvenile courts and stuff. But I mean, once you reach a certain point, playtime's over and the school of hard knocks kicks in. And that's just the way it is. And I really think that's the way, okay, I ain't seen any other way. And with the school of hard knocks, like you basically, you know, you do bad, you get hit hard, ideally. And some people, and I think it comes to like what character you are, how that affects you. If you're particularly dense and malevolent and unchanging, you're going to get worse when subjected to the school of hard knocks. But if you're able to take a hint, the school of hard knocks will teach you to be a better person eventually.
So you were saying that basically, as a juvenile, you get pretty much chances. You don't get severe punishments, but once you're out of the juvenile system, you're an adult now, and you get hit with the full force of whatever entity or the law,
Reality.
right? The reality, yeah. And that it depends on your character. That if you're really bad, if your character is really poorly developed or bad or malevolent, it's only going to get worse for you. But if you can recognize from your hard knocks that you need to change your ways, then you'll start developing as a human again.
Yeah, because I mean, I guess there's another whole debate about like what is it, nature versus nurture, I think, like and that should be taken consideration. But I've known examples of people having very good upbringings that turn out to be very bad people, and I've known people who've had very dysfunctional upbringings and turned out to be good people. I think we all, as individuals, have decisions that we make throughout our life that dictates what path we fall on. And that's part of being an individual. You kind of choose your fate, so to speak. I mean, I think we're all dealt different cards, and life isn't fair. It would be very boring if it was fair. But I think a lot of people, especially on the left, underestimate how much choice people have over how they respond to what life deals to them.
So you were saying the nature versus nurture, that basically there are people who have all the advantages or brought up in good homes or with good parenting. They might turn out not to be good people. And then other people who really had a very dysfunctional background, through their own individual will and character, they can turn their lives into a good, productive life. And that the left seems to think that everything, the outside forces, whatever they might be, determine who you are as a person, not what's inside you determines who you are as a person.
Yeah. I think it's kind of hard to have a culture of empathy when the paradigm of the eternally oppressed versus the eternal oppressor is being pumped out there. And it's a very seductive idea, especially if you follow on or follow under the tree of you're oppressed. And so therefore you have a get out of jail free card of being an asshole, basically, because you have the worst hand. And yeah, and you're not going to have a lot of empathy towards people who you feel that are the oppressor vein. The empathy I think that doctrine is particularly directed to remove empathy, because why should you relate with someone who's the oppressor? And I think that's part of the problem as well.
So you're saying that the whole psychology that's being promulgated mostly by the left, I think, that there's victims or oppressed and the oppressor, and that if you're oppressed, whatever hand you're dealt in life, you can't really do anything about it, and so you're just always blaming the oppressor instead of like trying to do something with yourself on your own as an individual. That the individual pretty much is helpless, with no accountability or responsibility for their future or their development.
Yeah, I think part of becoming empathetic is being able to relate with another person. And that can be really hard when you don't have I think accountability is key in that. If you're accountable for your actions, a lot of times you want other people to be accountable as well. And that's very hard. For me, that's something I'm struggling with, is I'm starting to assume that a lot of people around me don't have accountability for themselves. So I've cut off empathy towards them because I've kind of view a lot of people as lost causes, because I'm relating less and less with this new generation that's coming up and this new culture that's being promoted. I just don't relate with it. And if I don't relate with something, it's hard to empathize with it. And my time's up.
So you basically said that that if people are in this mindset where they're the victim and they blame the blame for all their problems, or problems, even if they don't have problems, they blame the problems that other people are having on this oppressor versus the oppressed, and that they aren't displaying any accountability about themselves, and that you really don't want to deal with these people because they're basically not going to be, they're not going to be able to empathize with you. So you don't really want to waste your time trying to get some empathic.
It's hard for me to relate. In fact, it's hard for me to relate. It's hard for me to empathize.
Then if it's hard for you to relate to that person, it would be hard for you to empathize with that person.
That's all. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay, it's your turn to select, Jessica.
My brain is kind of like going right now, but anyway, yeah, there's the whole.
Who are you speaking to?
I guess I'll speak to you next.
Okay.
It seems like the media, the educational system, entertainment, like Hollywood type people, they're trying to divide people by always harping on this the privileged people, even though they're the privileged people. Global warming, and if you don't do everything we say, you're a bad person. So I don't think that builds any empathy between people. I think it sort of turns people off and makes them shut down and not really even want to participate with each other in a lot of ways. And so I think it kind of destroys any hope of empathy.
So there's a lot of kind of forces that are sort of blocking and destroying empathy. For example, I think you'd mentioned a couple of groups. Was it like the movie industry or media?
Right.
And that their sort of what their approach is kind of dividing people and blocking empathy.
Yes. I notice like when I'm out and about in the everyday world, people aren't behaving towards each other the way the media tries to divide us. We all like are pretty polite. We open doors for each other. We say thank you to the clerk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, doesn't matter who the clerk is. They could be like Caucasian or Black or Latino, but we're pretty civil in our behavior towards each other on a daily basis. So I'm just wondering why they're trying to stir all this stuff up.
Uh-huh.
Power? I'm not sure. Is it for some kind of power they're hoping to get out of it, or it's just it's real toxic and dangerous.
So you're seeing a difference between just the everyday interactions you have with people. It seems quite civil. People open doors for each other, sort of thoughtful with each other, versus the media, which seems very sort of toxic, and it's almost like they're trying to stir up conflict, and it's just like kind of wondering what's going on there.
Yes. So I think it's up to each of us as individuals to try to walk in each other's shoes, unless someone's attacking you, of course, then you have to defend yourself. But and if somebody accuses you of something, like, because say if you run across on a campus, like you're wearing a Trump t-shirt or whatever, and they say you're a racist because you have a Trump t-shirt, I think you should be able to say to that person, you don't know me, and you should defend yourself. And that's appropriate.
So you see, it's appropriate to defend yourself. So if you're like in a campus or just anywhere, wearing a Trump t-shirt and people are accosting you, that you should be able to defend yourself. So kind of just in support of self-defense.
Yes. So that the empathy breakdown, I think, comes to that point when you can't express your political beliefs without
yes. Mm-hmm.
threat of violence.
Yeah, so there's a breakdown in empathy if you can't express yourself without fear of being, violence being directed at you. So that's like a block to empathy if people can't feel like they can express themselves.
Yes, verbally or visually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you can't say what you want, you can't wear a t-shirt, or you just can't kind of be yourself. That if people try to shut you down, that's like a block to empathy.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Is there more? Okay. Then I'll speak to David. I agree with what Jessica is saying about. I think people should be able to say what they want, and that's what we do at the empathy tent. We go, we set up. It's like if it was me and the right wing came over and wanted to speak in Berkeley, I say whatever you want, and not only can you have free speech, but I believe in free empathy, which is to offer empathic listening, to try to hear and understand what people are saying. So I think that should be sort of our default. I would like to see that as a default cultural norm. It's like, oh, you can speak, but also people will listen, and then and it's mutual. So I don't support the political correctness where you have to be afraid of saying what you want.
So you said you agree with what some of the things Jessica was saying, that you're a believer of freedom of speech, a right to free speech. You also feel like there's a right to free empathy, for you at least, and
yeah.
And you like to encourage that, like at your empathy tests, like if the right wing comes over, you feel like you would like to listen to what they have to say.
Yeah, and if Antifa wants to speak out on whatever they want to talk about, that's like, I'm willing to listen. It's like, you can say whatever you want, and I'm offering you free empathy. So I believe in your free speech, and I believe in free empathy. And I think that empathy is what transforms it. People are afraid of what people are saying, but if you can empathize with people, you kind of go past the fear and you hear what's at the core of what they're saying. And at the core, I think there's just that humanity, that common humanity. So, yeah, I think that's what I'm supporting.
Yeah. You said that even if Antifa showed up and want to talk, that you're willing to listen to them, and that I totally forgot the rest.
Yeah, that's what I support, is that mutual listening on both sides.
You support mutual listening on both sides.
And it's the listening that transforms the things you're pissed off about, because you get past the surface, and once you get past the surface and you see what's really underneath that you really connect to people's common humanity. And I don't understand why people can't figure that out. Like, what the hell is going on with this society that people can't just figure that simple thing out? I mean, at a large scale, at least.
And you said that essentially, if people drop their defenses and look past the surface, that they'll be able to relate with one another.
Yeah.
You don't understand why this is so hard for people to understand, and why this can't be implemented on a large scale.
Yeah, and then also speaking to the thing you're talking about, victimization. I think the whole victimization, I agree that it's a block to empathy. If you see yourself as a victim, and there's a whole thing called the drama triangle in mediation, and it's like you see someone as a victim, and then someone comes to their rescue, and there's the perpetrator, and then there's the victim dynamic. Then someone else sees this and they want to be the rescuer, so they try to rescue the victim, and then in turn they turn the person that's the perpetrator into a victim. And there's this constant shifting that happens between perpetrator, victim, and rescuer. And I just see that happening with this whole victim culture. It's this unending, kind of block to empathy.
I only remember so much.
Or just the essence of it.
You brought up that, you believe that this whole victimization element is an issue, and you brought up this interesting idea of you call it a drama triangle, and that you have, like, on one hand, you have like the victim, and then you have like the oppressor. Then you have like the rescuer that shows up, try to help the victim deal with the oppressor. And that in turn turns the oppressor into the victim. And it kind of just, I'm assuming, never ends.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a concept in mediation. And it's like this, it's called the drama triangle.
We got to try.
Yeah, the drama triangle. And the way out of it is empathy. Because instead of seeing anyone as a victim, you hear what the experience is, and you reflect back the experience of whoever's in pain or something, saying, oh, I hear you're in pain, but you don't like feel sorry for them. As soon as you start feeling sorry for people, you're blocking empathy in that sense, or try to rescue them. You're not trying to save them or rescue them, but you're trying to hear them. And then hearing the person who is being seen as the perpetrator, you hear what's your concern. And then you try to get the two to kind of support the two in dialoguing. So there's sort of a dynamic that you can, to shift that energy.
You said that one thing that you feel like that can break this drama triangle phenomenon is people actually listen to each other, because when someone's the victim, or if someone's trying to help the victim, they're not really listening to them. They're just, playing their role. So
yeah.
And when the communication happens, the preconceived roles of other people perhaps kind of dissipates, and people kind of relate with each other on equal footing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. So that's a dynamic I see as well. I see the right complaining about this, and and I agree that there is that that dynamic happening, but the right doesn't talk about how to get out of it. They don't say, well, you empathize with all sides, and then we create a culture of empathy, which I see as the solution. I don't see that the right really has a. They're just saying don't play the victim, which is fine, but they're not really giving suggestions of what to do. And I think that's the thing is what can we do to create a more empathic culture? What are some real action steps that we can take?
Okay, you said that you feel like the right does recognize the problem of people playing the victim, but also in turn that they don't really have a solution for this. That all they do is just like all they say is don't be a victim, don't be a cuck or whatever, And so they don't. The right really isn't embracing empathy. They're just saying don't play a victim, which is not really solving anything.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel heard. Boy.
Okay. I would like to. I think these are interesting ideas. I will speak with. Who should I speak with, Jessica or you?
It's your choice.
I'll speak with you, and then you can jump over to Jessica. So,
okay.
All right, I'll speak with you, Edwin. Yeah, I like to bring this back a little bit to like the original thing about law enforcement and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're touching on some good stuff, but I like to try to keep focus. I brought this up before, and I think a lot of people, especially on the left, have forgotten or never knew what service the police provide. And this might sound dysfunctional, but like if you've ever seen that movie The Purge or whatever, I think like maybe the police officers should just leave should just quit for a month, and people kind of realize why we have police officers. Of course, bodies would pile up, buildings would catch on fire. I think, that sounds extreme, but I think a lot of people are just completely just either dishonest or completely naive of how important it is to have police officers.
Mm-hmm. So you want to bring it back to the police and say that the people aren't appreciating the importance and the role of the police. And if the police weren't there, we'd have sort of like the Purge, everybody murdering each other and the bodies would just be piling up. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I heard this once in a talk I went to, and it's kind of stuck with me. I think there's some key differences that people that are naturally more liberal and people naturally more conservative have, and I think one of those key differences is that I think liberals think that human nature is inherently good, and I think conservatives believe that human nature is inherently not so good. And I think it's important. I think it's healthy for you talking about like developing these things, these skills of empathy, but I don't think this happens naturally, and so, I think what happens naturally is what would happen if the police just quit for 1 month. That's human nature unchained, so I think people need to recognize that side of themselves, that side of humanity, that we need to be taught to be good. We're not inherently good.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that liberals think people are inherently good, where conservatives don't see people they see people as inherently bad, and that people need to be taught to be good. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it is.
And that you would see that if we had like
yeah. So if we got rid of the police for a month, it would turn into the Purge, and all the badness, the murder, the mayhem would just come pouring out. And
that would be human
it's like if without the police, true human nature would kind of just come out. And
yes, and a lot of that would be repressed stuff coming out, but yeah, I don't think people are inherently good. And I think the left has some very weak arguments. They're like, look at kids and look at babies, look how sweet they are. I'm like, they're not sweet. They are helpless. And if they were given the powers of adults, they would be tyrannical. There's nothing more tyrannical than a bad baby. But people think it's cute because they're small and not, they're not a threat.
So you're saying that liberals will say, oh, look, to kind of make their case for the goodness, inherent goodness, they point out to babies, or, oh, they're sweet, look at that, this wonderful, sweet, good nature. And you're saying that they're not really that good. If you just let them run amok, they're pretty tyrannical.
Yes. Kids are horrible. I had a bad childhood. I mean, I just gave you one example of it. Kids are horrible.
Mm-hmm.
That they don't have power.
Yeah.
And I just think that goes in my original case, that people are not inherently good, that it takes wisdom, experience, and learning life lessons and putting effort towards a good path to become a good person.
Mm-hmm. So it takes real effort to become good, and the kids are starting as horrible little creatures, and you've had the experience when you were young. You saw that, and if you let them run amok if they had power, it'd be pretty horrible. Really horrible stuff would happen.
Lord of the Flies.
It'd be Lord of the Flies.
I guess one last point before I go. That what was I going to say? Yeah, that I forgot. Whatever.
Okay, so you forgot. You just end with Lord of the Flies. Okay, then I'll speak to Jessica.
So you go first.
Yeah, I'll speak to you. There's a book called The Science of Evil, and it's a Cambridge University professor, and he wrote about this term evil, good and evil. And he actually tried to translate the word good and evil into that evil is an empathy erosion. Because if you use the word evil, it's sort of supernatural, like, it's like the supernatural forces, the Satan and all that kind of stuff. And if you say that this is like a lack of empathy, then you have something to work with that you can work with scientifically and actually create programs and structures to teach empathy. So I guess I want to point that out, that I would actually do that, like good and bad, good and evil. I think that could be translated into having empathy and the lack of empathy.
So what you're saying is that the book was translating the concept of evil, which is more like a spiritual or a supernatural term, into a more scientific term, which would be empathy versus non-empathy, and that it would be a good way to teach it would be to put it as empathy.
Yeah, because then it gives you something sort of that you can scientifically work with. So those kids who were little monsters, and I've seen them, I've gotten bitten by my nephew, who just comes up and bites you on the leg. He's like 4 years old, and it hurts like the dickens. He's not thinking about how it's going to affect me. He's got his own little issues going on, and he beats up on his sister, and they're beating up on each other. But they're not really, but they do have the capacity for learning empathy, and I was teaching it to them. And it takes time. You got to listen, you got to reflect back what you hear, and then you teach them to empathize with their sister or brother. And so I just see it as a skill and a mindset that can be taught, even to little kids.
Yeah, so you're saying that little kids, probably their sensory systems are pretty unregulated, and they're more animalistic in their behavior, but they can be civilized by adults.
Yeah, but I think if they're learning that from the childhood on, from empathic parents, that they don't even have to go through some of these really crazy things. They're just losing control and stuff. That so I do see that they're still teaching and so forth, but I just see it as doable. I mean, I've seen it, I've experienced it with my nephews and nieces that it's doable to teach them. My brother is very conservative. He's Trump supporter. His thing is whoever wins wins. The kids are out there. Whoever he just kind of watches them beat each other up. And I come in there, Mr. Empathy, and I'm like trying to teach them empathy. So we got two different philosophies, two different approaches that kind of happen.
So you're saying that you believe it's possible to teach children to be civil towards each other through empathy, and not just give in to their impulses with biting, and that your brother is on the opposite political spectrum of you, and he's more on the side, let's just let him fight it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Prefer fly.
Yeah, and then it's only when they get so annoying that he just said, go sit in the corner. Then it's just like punishment, right? It's like it reaches a certain threshold, and then they get punished for not obeying. So, but it's not like an impact. And I have stories about that I can't because of time go into, but how I kind of mediated the conflict, and they worked through conflict, and they kind of learned some skills. So there's two different, basic philosophies there.
So you're talking about the two different philosophies, that whereas just going to the corner when it reaches its apex and an adult needs to intervene, versus trying to get them to talk to each other and
learn those empathic listening and skills. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I feel heard. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. What I'm saying, I'm talking about what David was talking about. If there were no police, I think.
Who are you speaking to? David? You speaking to David?
Well,
or
kind of redirecting the subject. I could speak to you or David. It doesn't matter.
Go ahead, speak to him, because I just spoke.
Okay. There's already this dynamic of the police standing down in places like Chicago. They don't police there anymore, really, because if something happens and they do have to actually intervene violently with some of these gang members, then they have to go up before a judge. They have their reputation. There's riots. So they're just not policing anymore. So the homicide rate's out of control in Chicago because of lack of policing. And their clearance rate on homicides is really ridiculously low. So I think you can see kind of a microcosm of what it's like to not have a police presence in a neighborhood.
Okay, you said that in Chicago that a lot of polices are standing down because it's simply not worth it, so to speak. Like if they do get involved in having to use force in a situation, that they end up getting in trouble with they have to go before the boards of committees and explain their actions, and then there's riots that happen in response to that. So they started just standing down, and they have a low clearance rate of murder cases. And you said this is a good example on a small scale what it's like when there isn't police doing their job.
Yes. So I think it's real important for the law enforcement to be able to do their jobs. And I think because of the whole Black Lives Matter, the Ferguson thing, different situations, because even though there probably are police officers that either because they're not trained properly or maybe they have their own issues, that they discharge their duties unfairly and maybe sometimes shoot people what they shouldn't be shooting them. But all in all, I think most law enforcement, their response to violent criminals is to defend themselves, because a lot of times these people that they do stops on, they're going to go out in a blaze of glory, like Jimmy Cagney and Top of the World Coppers type of situation. And they don't really have a choice.
So you said you feel like organizations like Black Lives Matter is not making things any better, and that you think for the most part police officers, when they use force, it's justified, and that you think there's sure there's cases of um, of police officers firing when it's not necessary, and it might be due to lack of training, or it might be just not a very good person. But you think all in all that police officers are generally justified in using force because a lot of times they're dealing with people, criminals, gang members, or whatever, that have this mentality of like, if they're going down, they might as well go down in a blaze of glory. And gave some references that were, I'm guessing, before my time.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. For my time too, but reason I got into it.
I got the gist of it though.
Yeah. So I don't know, it's going to have to be, we either have to change our attitude about how law enforcement deals with these more violent people, or just let them kill each other like in Chicago. So empathy will take a long time to build this to rectify these types of situations. I think it's not going to be like a quick fix.
Okay, you said that you're not sure how we're going to deal with this. Basically, that there's no quick fix.
Yes, that's all I have to say right now.
Okay, it's just my turn.
Do you want this? I just set 90 minutes for this call. Do you want should this be the last one, or we can go a little bit longer too?
I've had enough since it was only 3 people.
Yeah, it was a lot. Okay. Do you want to finish?
I'll finish. Can I finish it?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll speak with Jessica. I'll speak with Jessica. I don't know. It's a big mess. Like we have a counterculture that's, promoting violence. Though, even though it seems like violent crime is down altogether since the 70s and stuff, but I feel like if it's going to explode big because we have a lot more population now, and there's a lot of stuff just brewing underground, and things could blow up really big.
Sorry. You said that right now violent crime is probably down since the 70s, but there's a lot of undercurrents going on, bubbling beneath the surface, and there's more people now. And you said something about the counterculture, I think.
Counterculture promoting more violence.
More violence, and it could explode.
Yes. And I think the more we neuter our police, the worse it's going to get. I don't feel safe when I walk around San Francisco. I don't. Part of that is past trauma. I mean, I've got memories of violence all throughout the street when I was homeless and stuff. And I think there's a lot of disconnected liberals that neuter the police, and I think they think that they're going to be immune to the violence that they're basically promoting, because they live in towers or whatever. But, things could get very bad. It's going to get progressively worse. And even more so, I think it just makes our culture a little bit more sick. We have potential to be so much more, I think.
Yeah, you were saying that you feel like because of the lack of policing and the mentality to support the lack of policing in San Francisco, that you don't feel safe walking around because the capabilities you've experienced when you were homeless, of the violence that's lurking out there, and you feel like you could be in danger because the police aren't really doing their jobs, not because they don't want to, but because probably the civil authorities are telling them not to.
Yeah, the police here are a joke. I can tell you firsthand. 6 years ago, I'll tell you a story. Like I went into Walgreens. This was back when I was like an IV speed crazy person. You know, I was one of those. I actually went into Walgreens, and I planned on stealing a bunch of stuff, but I noticed I was being followed, and I decided to put everything back. But out of principle, I was going to steal this bag of candy. That's just the mindset I was in. I was coming out of there with something, you know. And then like this Chinese guy stopped me at the door, and he's like, you know, give me what you stole. And I gave him that bag, and he goes, no, we're going to search you. I'm like, no, you don't touch me. And then I pull out this like scary looking, like rusty, like screwdriver. And I put it up to his, you know, like I was going to stab him in his eye. And then of course he let me go, and I ran out. That's basically attempted murder right there. Right. And the police picked me up like half a block up, and they took me to the police station. And basically I stunk so bad because I haven't took a shower in so long that they let me go because I was stinking up the whole place. And like they gave me all my sharp objects back, and I was just back walking the street later that night. You know, I don't think it's because I was white. I think it was just because there's so many crazy people walking around. They didn't want to deal with me. I wasn't worth it. And I know that, and I've changed, you know, but I know that criminals are not disciplined here really. And I think SF is ground zero for a lot of liberal policies, and this is only going to spread throughout the country. That's not going to be good.
So you were saying that even several years ago, up to 6 years ago, you were threatening a shopkeeper or a guard, I suppose, at Walgreens with a rusty weapon, a screwdriver, and you felt that was like borderline attempted murder, and the police just let you go because of your hygiene, and they didn't want to deal with you, and that was pretty much the endemic to the whole police department in San Francisco, that they're really either they're overwhelmed by all the crazy people, or they're just not even supposed to deal with them. The civil authorities don't want them to deal with them.
Yeah, and I'm
because of that liberal attitude.
Yeah, I also ended on this. Like, I wished I was more of a positive person, like Edwin. Maybe I can work towards that. Technically, through my 12-step programs, I'm supposed to be becoming more so, but you know, I'm not perfect. On one hand, I feel like we have the capacity to create a very bright future, you know, a very powerful nation, a very mature, you know, perhaps thriving multicultural environment. But unfortunately, I feel like it's going towards another way, you know, and I think there's a lot of misguided people that are angry at authority that do not realize what's lurking underneath human nature through all of us. And I'm almost to the point now where I'm indifferent. I'm like, yeah, sure, let it go to hell. Guess what? If you don't have police, it doesn't mean you get to do what you want to. That means I get to carry around a gun and blow your brains out if you look at me funny. People are going to the good people are going to defend themselves no matter what. You know, so it's either going to be police officers or people taking the law in their own hands. You know, hopefully this doesn't come back to bite me or whatever. I'm not saying I'm not like looking for that right now, but I see that as a potential future of just like straight up Wild West, everyone packing and there's no law, and that's what happens. So where empathy falls in between all that, who knows? You know, it's it's going to be a long road ahead. But those two potential futures is what I'm looking at, and I can go either way at this point.
So what you just said to close was that we all have the potential to make a better future with empathy and positive input into the culture, into society. But it's sort of being trending more towards this breakdown of law and order, which is probably, I don't know if you said this, but aided and abetted by the civil authorities. And they don't realize what they're dealing with, and the pot they're stirring up could just blow out of control, and people would just have to resort to individually defending themselves instead of depending on the forces of order, as they call it in France.
Yes, I feel hurt.
And empathy. It's hard to get the empathy thing to control all this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. So I'm going to stop the recording and then we'll just have a debrief. I'll start it again and we'll have a separate clip that's